When passengers on the train are aware of how their numbers work and what the purpose of the train is, does that change the dynamic of how they go through this intense form of interdimensional therapy? The answer is, not really. As this episode shows, personal change and growth are not things you can easily force, and being hyper-aware that you're supposed to work on your faults may not be all that helpful without the proper guidance. As much as Lake feels confident to guide Jesse, her scattershot approach predictably proves ineffective.
Your hand is trash! You gotta learn more stuff.
While it's true that the Infinity Train also operates on a scattershot approach to self-improvement, where countless train cars are created en masse in the hopes that some of them wind up suitable for a given passenger, what makes it categorically different from Lake's slapdash attempts, other than the sheer magnitude of the operation, is the fact that the train's number system is accurately tuned to the psychological state of the passengers. An obvious fundamental problem to Lake's attempts to help Jesse is that she's not even aware what his problems are. How are you going to guide a person to self-improvement if you don't know what needs to be fixed?
Go to game design camp? I don't know.
What transpires for the first half of the episode can be summed up as Lake ordering Jesse around, Jesse blindly following her directions without much consideration of his own, with the result being that his number goes up because Jesse is yet again letting somebody else dictate the flow for him. At one point, Lake does at least ask Jesse what's troubling him.
Tell me what your problems are.
Well, if you can call that asking. But normally, when engaging in talk therapy, particularly with a cognitive behavioral approach, your therapist tries to help you understand how your thoughts are formed, and what components of your thought process might be harmful and could require intervention. Lake doesn't have the emotional intelligence or the patience to dive that deep into Jesse's psyche. Now, Jesse isn't being entirely forthcoming here either, though, as he's too ashamed and afraid to bring up what recently occurred with his little brother. This is mirrored in Lake's own fear and shame over her backstory, as later in the episode, Lake refuses to reveal she's a wanted fugitive despite the two of them being in danger. The map car is a very Jesse-centric episode, but that was one of the big pivotal moments that Lake had in it. The takeaway for both characters is that in order for somebody to help you with your problems, you have to trust them enough to be honest with them. And speaking of that, I love these few brief seconds in the episode where Jesse might have actually been considering sharing the shitty thing he allowed to happen to his brother. We don't know for sure what Jesse was looking at with that somber expression, but come on. It was totally that video clip which we'll get to see in the next episode. You cannot convince me otherwise.
Hey! Phone time is not gonna fix you. This is number time.
If Lake wasn't so single-minded and managed to be more attentive, perhaps she would have even noticed that whatever Jesse was checking on his phone might be related to his troubled mental state. But in the process of literally trying to fill in the big picture, Lake is failing to figuratively look at the big picture. We do have to give her a little bit of credit, because she does eventually manage to reach an accidental breakthrough with Jesse by making fun of his butterfly stroke. Incidentally, it's when Lake finally stops fixating on the map for a brief moment and strikes up a casual conversation that the two of them are able to reduce Jesse's number, although Lake remains completely oblivious as to why.
I guess you need to talk more about sports or something.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The conversation about Jesse's place in the swim team leads him to realize that he's far too willing to sacrifice his own happiness for the sake of others.
It kinda sounds stupid when I say it out loud.
I really relate to this statement from Jesse. Sometimes thoughts can be really convoluted and jumbled, but when you try to articulate the thoughts out loud, it can become easier to step back and make an accurate value judgment of whether your thoughts are actually decent and make sense, or if they're the result of a mind that festered a bit too much. I want to get back to talking about Jesse's butterfly stroke, though, because it's such a good representation of his character flaws and the potential danger associated with them. Jesse defaulted to the butterfly stroke to get from point A to point B, despite it not being his preferred method of swimming, nor it being the fastest or most efficient way to swim. It goes to show that if you do something long enough, even if it's not of your own volition, it can become normalized to the point where you may no longer even think about why you're doing it in your day-to-day life. The repeated actions you take can transform the sort of person you are, and how your mind operates subconsciously. This goes to show the danger associated with Jesse's character flaws. Jesse is still overall a good-natured and kind-hearted person at this point in his life, but he's susceptible to stray from being a decent person due to wanting to be accepted by everyone. Some of the people Jesse hangs around are shitty, they're a bad influence, and group dynamics can be rather insidious when it comes to normalizing behaviors. People-pleasers like Jesse are extra prone to getting swept up in this normalization due to their desire for external validation. Jesse defaulting to the butterfly stroke in the map car seems fairly innocuous on its own, but in the context of the following episode, the Toad car, we see that it's actually a big red flag. The butterfly stroke is such a great plot device to set us up for the following episode, and it really serves as a microcosm for Jesse's entire character's struggle. The big climax of this episode, the moment when Jesse begins to internalize some of the things he's learning about himself, initiates when Jesse finally asks,
What can I do?
Jesse can no longer follow Lake's orders because she's out of ideas, and thus has to think for himself. Jesse not only takes initiative, but he even thinks outside the box and looks for a solution unintended by the system. The point of the map car is to expand the map until the piece with the exit door can be found. I think it's a safe assumption that the train car resets when new passengers board after the previous passengers had already left.
I haven't had an explorer in ages.
However, Marcel is not satisfied with the intended purpose of the train car because he wants to keep expanding the map indefinitely and hanging out with the explorers. The windy dude might be lonely, I guess, although that's putting it very generously. By the way, the first time we saw Marcel, my first thought was being reminded of Over the Garden Wall and the Old North Wind, and partially because of that, I was expecting Marcel to be either villainous or at the very least a jerkass. And yeah, he certainly was. My favorite quote from Marcel is definitely,
One person guides, one person follows. It's a system. It's great. Let it be great.
There's two reasons why I love this bit of dialogue. First off, fighting the system is a pretty big theme in Book 2 of Infinity Train, especially when it comes to Lake's character arc, so it was nice to have this motif present itself early on as well. Marcel tried to establish his own system that ran counter to the purpose of the train car, but obviously his system is trash to the passengers of the train who are trying to keep moving on ahead. Marcel serves as a reminder that all the denizens of the train have their own individuality, and it's also not just Lake who may end up at odds with the quote-unquote intent of the train. And second, what Marcel describes as his system, one person guides, one person follows, well, that's exactly what Lake and Jesse were doing for the first half of the episode. Lake was guiding, Jesse was following, and the number only went up as a result. Marcel's dialogue served as like a meta callback to this method being completely flawed. So back to Jesse and his decision to take things into his own hands, Jesse realizes he doesn't have to follow the intended guidelines of the train car, which serves as like a little prologue to the major life lesson he takes to heart later in the season, that he doesn't have to behave how others expect him to. Jesse manipulates the map directly and makes his own exit door. Also notice that even after acting on his own behalf, Jesse still defaults to the butterfly stroke. He had to choke a little on some water before he realizes he should change to swimming freestyle. I love this little detail because not only does it serve to solidify Jesse's conviction, it's a reminder that ingrained traits are tough to overcome. Breaking habits doesn't happen easily. It takes continuous work and concentrated effort to undo prolonged programming. Jesse defaulting to the butterfly stroke after already realizing he should swim freestyle is basically symbolic foreshadowing to Jesse falling to peer pressure yet again later in Book 2. Implementing the butterfly stroke into the story was just a stroke of genius, as far as I'm concerned. So, seeing the world within the map car transform was a pretty cool moment conceptually, but I do wish there was more of an animation budget allotted to it. Everything just basically fades in, and considering that the episode sacrificed having a dynamic color scheme for most of its run in order to pull this gimmick for the big moment of payoff, it would have been nice if the transformation scene was more involved than just using fades. The way the sea serpent's design morphed was pretty nice, and I just wish the geography had transformed in a way more akin to that as well. Oh, I've also got a small nitpick. So, Marcel disappears because he was the wind.
I'm the wind!
Lake and Jesse are on a broken compass, which on a map depicts orientation on the basis of magnetic fields. So I feel like their makeshift boat should have also disappeared due to transforming into an intangible magnetic field. Although maybe since the compass was broken in half and all, the transformation didn't get carried out. I don't know, it's not really that important. Speaking of things that aren't that important, but are pretty fun, in this episode Jesse talks about a lunch lady that made him eat a bunch of celery.
Do you think Mrs. Graham is on the train?
Yeah, probably.
Lake is correct, because this has got to be Mrs. Graham making an appearance in the very first episode of Book 2. Contextually and comically, it's just very heavily implied that the person Jesse references and the person we already saw are one and the same. And that's about it for this review. This episode was simply awesome if you're a fan of quality characterization and establishing the pathway for character growth. I had a lot of fun learning more about Jesse and seeing him take the first few steps towards changing the sort of person he is. Sorry that this review took some time to release. I'm hoping to bust them out at a faster pace from here on out. Wish me luck, I could really use some.